You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hi, I'm Nina Torralba, Puma Podcast for Teka Teka News. This National Heroes Day, let's listen to snippets of an episode from our other podcast, What's Up? Araling Panlipunan Rebooted, about the Siege of Lipa. On June 7, 1898, a group of revolutionary soldiers ambushed Spanish forces commanded by Coronel Juan Rodriguez Navas, who were on their way to the provincial capital town of Batangas. The Spanish troops took refuge at Lipa's San Sebastian Cathedral, where they engaged in a 12-day battle against Filipino forces led by Generals Paciano Rizal and Eleuterio Marasigan. The conflict came to an end on June 18 when the Spanish soldiers surrendered under negotiated honorable conditions, coinciding with the declaration of Philippine Independence in Kawit, Cavite. This significant event has been largely overlooked in history. In this episode, historian Sab Schnabel, history nerd Siege Tantenko Malolos, and myself, Nina Torralba, producer for What's Up, went back in time to experience the Siege of Lipa as reenacted by the Republica Filipina Reenactment Group. We talked to the organizers and participants to discuss public history and the importance of being interested in our roots.
Goodness gracious, Zaprakaba!
At discretion! Fuego!
We witnessed a historical reenactment of one of the most important battles in the Philippine Revolution against Spain, the Siege of Lipa.
We joined dozens of volunteers who were there to reenact the battle with period costumes and everything. So, of course, we dressed up, made up characters, and off we went to learn more about what it takes to recreate a historical battle.
We took our producer Nina Torralba on this journey with us, so you might hear her voice in this episode.
So, let's hop into our time machines and go!
But first, let's learn a little more about where we're going.
It's time for the Pearl of the Orientation. The year was 1898. We hear about this year a lot in Philippine history, but what was it actually like?
C.S. Lewis, author of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, was born. Basketball had just been invented. Electricity was starting to show up in people's homes, and women wore corsets.
There were so many newspapers and broadsheets from the time that show us what life was like at the turn of the century. Scenes from these newspapers show Escolta bustling and the Philippines as one of the fronts of the Spanish-American War.
By this time, the world was connected by the telegraph and communication lines. The globalized world that we might recognize was already starting to take shape.
There was even ice in the Philippines. Granted, it was a luxury item that had to be shipped here. It was still something you could find in Manila at the turn of the century.
But today, we're going beyond Manila to another town that the rest of the world knew us by, Lipa, Batangas.
The Siege of Lipa was one of the many battles that made up our revolution against Spain.
This was the second phase of the revolution. Emilio Aguinaldo had returned from Hong Kong, and the Filipinos had taken up arms with more enthusiasm.
Around this time, the Spanish were starting to struggle. A contingent of retreating Spaniards got stuck in Lipa, Batangas. They took refuge in the church and various other fortified buildings, but the people of Batangas expelled them.
Everyone was part of the fighting, even civilians who came to the soldiers' aid. The Filipinos were so close they could almost taste victory. Now that we know where we're going and what to expect, let's actually take a trip back.
Isang mapagpalayang hapon sa inyong lahat. Welcome to the 3rd Guarnición in Intramuros of Republica Filipina Reenactment Group, in partnership with Intramuros Administration and Renacimiento Manila, and in collaboration with Seriaco Tiradores Brigade. By May 19, 1898, Emilio Aguinaldo arrived at Cavite Puerto, present-day Cavite City. Aboard the USS McCulloch, and subsequently organized local forces to continue the resistance against the Spanish. After a brief skirmish with an isolated Spanish detachment, Aguinaldo first unfurled the Filipino flag at Teatro Caviteño, Cavite. The following days, he issued orders to distribute circulars to the nearby provinces of Manila, Batangas, Laguna, Bulacan, Tayabas, present-day Quezon, Morong, present-day Rizal, Pampanga, Nueva Ecija, Tarlac, and Northern Luzon to commence general operations against the Spanish by May 31, 1898. In the province of Batangas, towns were liberated one by the Filipino revolutionaries led by General Eleuterio Marasigan of Calaca, Batangas. A battalion of Spanish Army Cazadores, led by Colonel Rodriguez Navas, marches through the town of Lipa en route to the city of Batangas to join with the remaining forces of the Regimientos Indigena or native Filipino troops of the Spanish Army in the defense against the revolutionaries across Batangas and Laguna. As they reach the center of town, they are greeted by a small group of Guardia Civil, catching their breath. They inform Colonel Navas that the last of their native troops in Batangas province had surrendered, with many of them deciding to join the Filipino revolutionaries in the fight against Spain. Frustrated by the report, Colonel Navas decided to stand his ground in Lipa and face the Filipino revolutionaries.
It's the beginning of the reenactment. The narrator explains the situation that the Filipino troops find themselves in.
We stand in the middle of the Plaza Moriones in Intramuros. There are props strewn about. People shout and march in formation.
The Filipinos, commanded by General Paciano Rizal, told the Spanish that it was senseless to continue fighting since thousands of Filipino revolutionarios, including the native regiments who have defected, had encircled the town. Spanish officer did not believe them and told the Filipino forces that they would be granted amnesty should they return to their places of Mother Spain. Although the Spanish rejected surrender, they agreed to a temporary ceasefire so that Filipino troops could retrieve their dead. Given the strong position of the Spanish, the Filipinos then began to dig their own trenches during the night so as to not expose themselves to gunfire.
Ceasefire. People come out to claim their dead and wounded. There are women coming to tend to these fallen soldiers. We're moving from the Plaza Moriones to the barracks, and out comes the cannon as the soldiers hide among the ruins.
Understanding the tenuous situation and limited supplies of the besieged Spaniards, the Filipinos opted to starve them out in a siege rather than risk more lives in continued attacks, and also to avoid wasting ammunition. Guards were stationed along the trenches to check their movements. During the course of the siege, command of the Filipino forces was passed from General Paciano Rizal to General Leocadio Laurel, and then finally to General Eleuterio Marasigan, who reorganized the besieging forces and brought in a cannon from Cavite, which was promptly used to bombard the Spanish-occupied convent. To further support the siege, Doña Gliceria Mariela de Villavicencio, the Angel of the Revolution, donated supplies such as food, clothing, and ammunition to General Marasigan. With their supplies depleted and hopes of relief dwindling, Colonel Navas decided to surrender rather than fight to the death. A Spanish soldier waved a white flag to signal their surrender to the Filipino forces. Following the siege, the residents of Lipa took to the streets and held festivities to celebrate the end of the Spanish rule in Batangas province. The Siege of Lipa was an important victory for the Filipino revolutionary forces. Together with the arms taken from the surrender of the Batangas capital, the revolutionaries had acquired several thousand firearms and much ammunition from the defeated Spanish forces. These captured arms would be used in the continued liberation of towns and provinces across the Philippines.
So in the end, the Filipinos come out victorious.
They win more arms to fuel the fire of the revolution.
So that's the battle. But who were the people who played parts in it? Surely these aren't all paid actors.
A few minutes before the reenactment, we were able to talk to some of the people who rushed onto the battlefield to put on the show. No one actually got hurt.
A lot of the performers are basically independent public historians. They do their own research and they even make their own costumes.
We were so impressed by the quality of costumes and props we saw.
It just goes to show the dedication of these volunteers.
Like a group of middle-aged men hailing all the way from Bulacan, where they work in security and enforcement groups to support the local police.
Ako po, ang hanap buhay ko, palahero ko dati, jewelry. Tawag dito yung mga personalized name. Kung nakikita nyo sa online yung mga may pangalan na necklace. Yan po yung ginagawa ko. Pinaka-favorite namin to banding. Iba-ibang lugar kasi kami. Kagaya nila, Manila, meron taga Isabela. Kumbaga, nagkakaroon kami ng maraming mga kaibigan. Ako po si Leonard Halasan, 46 years old, taga Maykawayan, Bulacan. Ako po ay isang ama na rin ng 4 na anak. Actually, yung ano namin, grupo pala namin iba-iba. Kami yung Syriaco Brigade Tiradores, yung mga taga Bulacan. Ako po yung tumatay secretary ng Syriaco Brigade Tiradores ng Bulacan.
Ano po yung role nyo sa enactment today?
Mga ano kami, Sandatahanes. So, kami yung mga recruited, new recruit na mga sundalong Pilipino, mga Kawal Republika kung tawagin.
In the Bulacan group, there was even a father-son duo doing these reenactments together. It's their bonding thing, which is the cutest.
Okay, we honestly didn't know what to expect when it came to the ages of the reenactors, but we were surprised to see the variety. Gen Z made up a big part of the people involved.
Actually, I'm Larisabel M. Kiming. I'm 18 years old from De La Salle University. I'm grade 12. I'm actually a cosplayer. I started professionally doing it late December, but here's the twist. I cosplay with Filipinianas. I combine pop culture with history.
So I'm Carlos Guzman. I'm from FU Alabang.
Do you have a character that you make for yourself when you're doing these, when you're reenacting?
What do you imagine?
Well, obviously I don't look very, Filipino. So I like to think that I'm some kind of one of the mestizo, half Spanish, half Filipino soldiers who defected to the Filipino side, who saw how hard it was that the Spanish people from Europe were treating us so badly. I'm joining them, helping fight the good fight and to save other people.
What do you think is your fate gonna be later? Like, what's gonna happen to you? What's gonna happen to you in the battle?
So in the first act, I'm gonna be unfortunately perishing. I will be dying. In the first act, I will be dying. Exactly. I'm gonna be really going out there and making sure everyone sees I die. But after that, I'm gonna be respawning, changing costume, and going back in. I'm gonna respawn like a gamer. Kind of a different character, just uniform change. Yeah.
The reenactors have to respond because there aren't always enough people to fill up the battalions. But newbies are welcome and encouraged. Don't worry about not having all the knowledge and costumes. That comes with experience.
So let's experience it. Here's what happens on the day of. Once the reenactors arrive, they get a brief on how the battle is going to happen. They do a staging and a rehearsal. They're taught the script and what they're supposed to do.
And they stay in character all day. They look the part and they speak the part.
But they were more than happy to talk to us with our 21st century recorders in their off time.
Until they're deployed to the battlefield. I mean, the reenactment. Don Luis Luna was one of the characters who was mentioned in the history books. He has his own actor who knows his backstory.
Joshua Matipo, founder and head ng RFRG, Republika Filipina Reenactment. My role will be the negotiator between the besieged Spanish forces and the revolutionary forces, besieging them sa Lipa. Later on, he became the Secretary of General Miguel Malvar during the Philippine-American War.
And of course, there was General Eleuterio Marasigan. We caught up with a man who played him as a character, and he was a professional actor.
Oh, I'm Edwin Ginto. I'm from Cavite City. I'm a historical reenactor. And then, so I'm playing General Marasigan right now during the Siege of Lipa City. All right, so I was the one who destroyed the Spaniards. Crushed them all.
Awesome, excellent.
Yeah. Kicked them out of the Tangas. Yeah. All right.
There was definitely space for women in this reenactment.
We caught up with one of the Cruz Roja, or Red Cross characters, and she was telling us more about how they are taught historically accurate medical procedures.
I'm Vivian Gapido. So I'll be doing Cruz Roja. So nung panahon ng revolusyon, yung mga babae yung gumagawa ng paggagamot. Usually, halimbawa may sugat sa ulo. So may mga technique din na ginagamit sa pagbabandage. Sa head na bandage at saka yung old school na arm sling.
There are some rules, however, some guidelines the reenactment teams put together to stay true to the time period. Here's Diego Magallona, a history teacher and our guide to this wonderful world of historical reenactments.
We have to restrict our guys from speaking English. We're even stricter with the guys playing the Spanish. The guys who are acting as the Spanish, except for the Guardia Civil, because the Guardia Civil are mostly Filipinos talaga. But the guys who are playing the Spanish soldiers, we told them, you can't even speak Filipino. When you're shouting and stuff, don't. You have to like learn some Spanish.
So they get into character, they do their own research, but how do they determine who gets which role?
Yeah, is it all about looks? Diego says,
it's a mix. For the past few months, actually, the past few events, I was the officer, which is very tiring, as you can see. So, for the officers, we have standards. You have to be familiar with the drills. You have to know how to command, diba? How to make those kind of decisions, fast decisions. Okay, we have to move this way. I have to maneuver, and then I have to remember the commands, and I have to.
So if we have actors, we also have screenwriters. All of these people are following a script, and someone has to write that.
And someone has to research it.
Yeah, there's Alexander Avila, who is our secretary and one of our researchers, Jim Kodya, another of our research team, and me, of course, Diego Magallona of the RFRG research team. So we do the research and we also prepare the scripts.
Here's Joshua Matipo again talking about sources.
Nandyan yung kay Ronquillo. Carlos Ronquillo was Secretary of Aguinaldo. Nandyan yung kay General Santiago Alvarez, who is the Captain General of the Magdiwang Forces and the in-law of Andres Bonifacio. Nandyan si General Artemio Ricarte, yung libro niya. Nandyan din yung mga memoirs din ni Aguinaldo. On the Spanish side, ang pinaka dyan yung kay Sastron, Manuel Sastron, yung La Insurrección de Filipinas. And then, from the military perspective naman, Colonel Federico Monteverde, yung sinasabi nilang La Campaña Pilipinas, División La Changa.
So those are the people from whom they get their information. And how do they plan out the battles?
Sometimes may mga groups kami sa Discord, saka sa exchanging ideas. Nag-betting process kami, ito yung nakita namin, ganito yung nakita namin. Kukumpara namin yung mga datas. Not just only for the Filipino sources, but also from the Spanish sources. To make it more holistic, mapakita natin yung objective punto de vista of the revolution.
So, to recap, these people make their own costumes.
They find their own way to historical sites.
They do all their own research and take time out of their schedules
to go back in time and live like people who lived 100 years ago.
And all of this is voluntary. They do this for the love and the community of people who care about our history.
Hello, I'm Sabrina.
Hi, Sabrina.
So we do a historical podcast. We wanted to see what you guys thought of the reenactment. What did you think?
Well, it's amazing to see how they do it during those times. Technically, we're homeschooling kasi our kids, so that's why we try to expose them on the history. So yeah, so it was nice that they could see it, in the face.
Could I get your name?
I'm Vim.
Yeah, and I'm Camille. These are our children. What's your name?
Celestine.
Yeah, say it.
Celestine.
Celestine.
My name is Caleb.
What's your
My
name?
name is Catriana.
Catriana.
What did you think of the reenactment?
What did you think, ate? Go.
That's fine.
Families, kids, students. This is for them.
Gusto rin naming makatulong doon sa mga estudyante, sa mga kabataan para maipamulat sa kanila yung nakaraan nating mga Pilipino kung paano natin natamo yung kasarilan ng Pilipinas.
We love history and that we want to impart to them a love for history. History is not very much appreciated in our country, so that's what we want to change. We mostly glossed over all of this in our grade school history books, so it wasn't as immersive or as great a learning experience as it is now while we're reenacting and acting as our, the people from the past, possibly our ancestors.
And that's it for today for Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Nina Torralba. This episode was produced by myself, recorded in Intramuros by Pidoy Blanco, and edited by Joe Salcedo. For more episodes on Philippine history, search up WhatsApp, spelled WhatsApp, Araling Panlipunan Rebooted on your favorite podcast app. Maraming salamat po.